Not all kings are remembered the same. Some built legacies that shaped nations, while others left trails of destruction and controversy. But in the heart of Buganda, two kings stood at the crossroads of history, and the choices of one Kabaka would change the kingdom forever. On one side, we have Kabaka Mutesa I, a man of calm and calculated diplomacy. His face reflects a leader who knows the weight of every decision, a ruler navigating a world where tradition meets the tide of foreign influence. And on the other side, Kabaka Mwanga II, young, fiery, and unpredictable. His glare tells the story of a king caught between authority, faith, and rebellion, a man whose decisions would ignite storms that echoed far beyond the palace walls. How did diplomacy, faith, and defiance collide to shape the destiny of an entire kingdom? What choices brought Buganda to moments of brilliance, and which decisions almost tore it apart? Over the next 30 minutes, we're going to uncover the secrets, the conflicts, and the pivotal decisions that defined Buganda's history. Imagine the scene: a royal scroll glowing under candlelight, a torch flaring in the night, missionaries facing impossible choices, all moments frozen in time, waiting to reveal how a kingdom's fate was truly decided. Buganda was more than a kingdom. It was the heartbeat of a people, a land rich in culture, tradition, and ceremony. Every song, every dance, every ritual carried meaning, and at the center of it all stood the Kabaka, the king. His word was law, his presence commanded respect, and his choices rippled through every village, every home, and every family. In Buganda, the king wasn't just a ruler, he was the embodiment of the kingdom spirit. Kabaka Mutesa I stepped into this role with a vision that stretched beyond tradition. He saw a Buganda that could embrace modernization without losing its soul. Diplomacy was his weapon. He welcomed foreign missionaries, engaged with European powers, and brought schools, trade, and technology to his people. Yet even as he opened doors to the outside world, he balanced this with a deep respect for Buganda customs, ensuring that the kingdom's roots remained intact. Then came Mwanga II, Mutesa's successor, a young king brimming with ambition but often ruled by impulsive emotion. Where Mutesa sought connection, Mwanga confronted it head-on. Missionaries, advisors, even members of his own court found themselves at odds with his decisions. Faith, tradition, and authority clashed under his reign, creating tensions that would soon ignite conflict across the kingdom. The stakes were immense: one kingdom, two kings, and choices that would echo for centuries. Decisions made behind palace walls would touch the lives of every citizen, alter the trajectory of Buganda's history, and leave marks that are still remembered today. And what Mwanga did next would shock even his closest allies, setting in motion events that no one could have predicted. Kabaka Mutesa I ascended to the throne at a time when Buganda was standing at the threshold of change. The kingdom was vibrant, steeped in centuries of tradition, yet the winds of the outside world were beginning to blow stronger than ever before. Mutesa understood that to protect his people and secure his legacy, he couldn't rely solely on the authority of the throne or the power of ancestral customs. He needed strategy, vision, and most importantly, diplomacy. From the very beginning of his reign, Mutesa demonstrated an uncanny ability to read people and situations. He was calm, deliberate, and patient, a king who preferred negotiation over confrontation. One of his earliest political strategies was to open Buganda to foreign missionaries, but he did so on his terms. He wasn't simply allowing outsiders in, he was using their knowledge and influence as tools to strengthen the kingdom. Schools were established, and suddenly, young Buganda children were learning to read and write, not only in their own language, but in English and Swahili. A printing press was introduced, allowing the kingdom to document laws, treaties, and cultural stories in ways that had never been possible before. Mutesa's diplomacy extended beyond missionaries. European powers saw him as a key player in East Africa, and he skillfully leveraged that attention. Weapons trade, alliances, and treaties became instruments of influence, not just survival. One story stands out. A delegation of foreign emissaries arrived in the capital, seeking trade concessions and political favor. Mutesa received them with ceremonial grandeur, yet behind his composed smile, he negotiated terms that favored Buganda, securing not only modern firearms, but also guarantees of protection and respect for the kingdom's sovereignty. The meeting seemed cordial on the surface, but the king had outmaneuvered them entirely. Yet, even as Buganda modernized under Mutesa's rule, tension simmered beneath the surface. He walked a delicate line, introducing schools and foreign ideas while preserving traditional ceremonies, rituals, and the authority of local chiefs. Some questioned whether embracing foreign influence would erode Buganda culture. Some feared that the new ways might upset the delicate balance that had held the kingdom together for centuries. And then there was Mwanga. The young prince observed Mutesa's successes with a mixture of admiration and simmering resentment. The throne was not just a symbol of authority, it was power, and power could shift. Mutesa's careful diplomacy and modernization efforts, while celebrated by many, planted the seeds of tension that would later erupt into a dramatic confrontation. But for now, Buganda thrived. Markets flourished, students filled the schools, and Mutesa's court was the epicenter of both tradition and innovation. The kingdom was on the rise, poised to become a formidable force in the region. And yet, behind the palace walls, the whispers began. Is this the way of the future, or the spark of a looming storm? Not everyone was happy with this new way of ruling, especially Mwanga. Kabaka Mwanga II ascended to the throne as a young man, barely out of adolescence, yet already carrying the heavy weight of expectation. Unlike his predecessor, Mutesa I, Mwanga was fiery, impulsive, and often ruled with his heart before his head. There was an intensity to him, a sense of urgency that colored every decision, every glance, every word he spoke. To the outside observer, he could seem passionate and determined, but beneath that exterior was a man grappling with deep personal insecurities. A king aware of the enormous shadow cast by Mutesa and desperate to assert his own authority. From the earliest days of his reign, Mwanga found himself at odds with the foreign missionaries his father had welcomed. To Mwanga, these outsiders were more than teachers or clerics. They were symbols of influence that threatened his control. He saw their presence as a direct challenge to the kingdom's traditions and his personal authority. Every act of obedience from Buganda's people to these missionaries felt like a slight, a reminder that loyalty could be divided. His frustration, unchecked, quickly escalated into conflict. One of the most infamous moments of Mwanga's reign was the martyrdom of the young Christian converts, a tragic episode that still echoes in Buganda's history. These were men and women of faith, many of them palace pages, who refused to renounce their beliefs. Mwanga, feeling both betrayed and humiliated, ordered their execution. The air was thick with fear, tension, and disbelief as the kingdom watched the events unfold. Flames licked the night sky, crosses were toppled, and the cries of the faithful echoed across the palace grounds. It was a spectacle of power, punishment, and personal insecurity rolled into one. A vivid display of the king's determination to assert his dominance no matter the cost. Yet Mwanga's actions were not born purely of cruelty. Beneath the surface lay a complex struggle between faith and authority, personal rebellion and societal expectation. Each decision weighed heavily, and each act of defiance against him reinforced his sense of isolation. The palace became a crucible where the young king's emotions collided with the demands of tradition, culture, and foreign influence. And then came the pivotal moment, a decision that would define not only his reign, but the course of Buganda's history. A group of missionaries and young converts refused his orders. Their steadfastness humiliated the king before his court. He could have chosen a path of mercy, negotiation, or compromise, yet he did not. In a tense, dramatic sequence, he ordered the executions, knowing full well the shockwaves it would send across the kingdom. He could have chosen differently, but he didn't, and this choice would change everything. The consequences were immediate and profound. Fear spread through Buganda like wildfire. Some chiefs whispered their doubts, unsure whether loyalty to Mwanga was safer than alignment with tradition or faith. Unrest simmered beneath the surface, and cracks began to appear in the kingdom's unity. Mwanga's actions not only created martyrs, but also set the stage for future confrontations, leaving a legacy of tension, courage, and tragedy.
By the end of this period, Mwanga was no longer simply a young king testing his authority. He had become a symbol of the storm that arises when personal insecurity, faith, and rebellion collide. The Kingdom of Buganda had witnessed both brilliance and brutality, and the people would remember these years not just as history, but as a warning, a lesson, and a turning point. MUTEESA I and Mwanga II could not have been more different, yet their reigns were inextricably linked by the same stage, the Kingdom of Buganda. Where MUTEESA approached leadership with calculation and patience, Mwanga ruled with impulse and emotion. MUTEESA's diplomacy was like a carefully tuned instrument, balancing every note to create harmony between tradition and modernization. He invited missionaries not to surrender power, but to learn from them, to adopt new knowledge, and to strengthen the kingdom. Schools, trade, and alliances became tools of progress, and even the most skeptical chiefs began to see the benefits of measured change. Mwanga, on the other hand, saw the intrusion of foreign influence as a direct challenge to his authority. Every lesson taught by a missionary, every act of conversion felt like a betrayal. Where MUTEESA built bridges, Mwanga built walls. He resisted, confronted, and at times destroyed, believing that any compromise would weaken not just his throne, but the identity of Buganda itself. His defiance created martyrs and fear, yet it also forced the kingdom to confront questions of faith, loyalty, and obedience that had never been so pressing. Imagine for a moment a modern leader trying to balance faith, tradition, and pressure from powerful outsiders. One wrong decision and public trust can collapse. One act of defiance and alliances can fracture. MUTEESA's approach reminds us of leaders who negotiate quietly, who see value in compromise without surrendering core principles. Mwanga's approach shows the risks of letting personal emotion and pride guide choices that impact millions. The consequences of their decisions were felt far beyond the palace walls. Ordinary citizens experienced both the benefits of modernization and the fear of sudden reprisal. Chiefs and advisors were forced to navigate a complex political landscape, aligning themselves carefully to avoid punishment or favor. The kingdom itself was being reshaped, not through battles alone, but through the cultural, religious, and political currents each king set in motion. And yet, the question lingers. Was Mwanga's resistance foolish, a reckless challenge to the inevitable, or was it heroic, a stand for the kingdom's identity against forces he feared would dilute it? The answer is not simple. His actions provoked both tragedy and admiration, fear and reverence, leaving a legacy that is still debated today. The choices made by these kings didn't just affect their time, they shaped the entire identity of Buganda. Every ceremony, every law, every interaction with foreign powers carried echoes of MUTEESA's careful diplomacy and Mwanga's fiery defiance. And as the kingdom moved into the next chapter of its history, the consequences of their clash would ripple for generations to come, leaving us to wonder, how would Buganda have fared if one king's approach had dominated entirely over the other?
The reigns of MUTEESA I and Mwanga II didn't end with their deaths. Their decisions left echoes that still resonate in modern Buganda.
Walk through the streets of Kampala or visit a village along Lake Victoria, and you can still see traces of their influence. Schools and institutions introduced under MUTEESA's watch laid the groundwork for education that continues to empower generations of Buganda. The printing press, the administrative structures, the cautious embrace of foreign knowledge, all of it set the stage for a kingdom that could engage with the wider world without losing its unique identity. Yet, alongside progress, Mwanga's legacy remains just as tangible. The stories of martyrs, the accounts of defiance against foreign influence, and the lessons of personal conviction are woven into Buganda's cultural memory. Mwanga's resistance may have created fear in his time, but it also left a blueprint for courage, showing what happens when someone stands firmly by their principles, even when the world challenges them. Ordinary people remember not just the buildings or the schools, but the moral and spiritual questions his reign provoked: loyalty, faith, and the consequences of unchecked authority. The clash between MUTEESA's diplomacy and Mwanga's defiance provides timeless lessons in leadership. Diplomacy, when executed with wisdom and foresight, can build lasting stability and open doors to opportunities. But stubbornness and impulsive decision-making carry steep costs, affecting not just leaders, but entire societies. Buganda's story reminds us that leadership is never about immediate gratification. It is about thinking in decades, centuries, even generations. And that brings us to a question we all face in our own lives. What would you do if your decisions affected generations? Imagine the weight of knowing that every choice, every negotiation, every act of defiance or compromise could echo decades later, shaping the lives of countless people you may never meet. MUTEESA's patience and Mwanga's defiance offer two very different answers, two paths that produced both triumphs and tragedies. But Buganda's story doesn't end there. The consequences of these two kings' decisions created ripples that led to outcomes no one could have predicted. The kingdom navigated colonization, political upheaval, and the modern pressures of nationhood. Yet the foundation laid by MUTEESA and Mwanga of education, faith, and identity proved resilient. Their legacies intertwined in unexpected ways, showing that history often rewards nuance and punishes extremes. And as we reflect on their reigns, one surprising truth emerges. The most lasting impact of a king is not just in monuments or laws, but in the questions they leave behind, the courage or caution they inspire, and the values that continue to shape a people long after their thrones have gone cold. Buganda, in many ways, is still living with the choices of these two kings, and their story challenges us to consider how our own decisions might echo far into the future.
Two kings, two very different paths, and one kingdom forever changed. MUTEESA I chose diplomacy, patience, and strategic modernization, carefully balancing the demands of tradition with the opportunities offered by foreign influence. Mwanga II, in contrast, ruled with fiery defiance, confronting challenges head-on and making bold, often dangerous choices that shook the foundations of Buganda. Together, their reigns show us that leadership is never simple, that the consequences of decisions reach far beyond the present, and that the story of a kingdom is written not only in victories and defeats, but in the courage, conviction, and vision of its leaders. Now, think about this. If you were in their place, facing the weight of a kingdom on your shoulders, which approach would you take? Would you negotiate patiently like MUTEESA, seeking to blend progress with tradition? Or would you stand firm and confront challenges boldly like Mwanga, even if it meant risking everything? The story doesn't end here. Buganda's history continues to unfold, shaped in part by the echoes of these two kings. If you want the full story of Buganda and its kings, the secrets, the conflicts, and the decisions that defined an entire people, make sure to check out the next episode. It's a journey you won't want to miss, because understanding the past is the key to seeing how a kingdom and its people truly endure.